Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to our 8th episode of Doc Talk. And I'm Captain Jeff Monroe, the Director of Education for the International Association of Maritime Port Executives. And I'm here with my co-host, Aimee and Jeff, the Executive Director of IRPT, the Inland Rivers Ports and Terminal Association. Aimee, so nice to see you again.
Oh, thank you so much, Captain, and you as well.
It's always wonderful, and I guess you've been suffering through some awful heat there in the Midwest. Summer has finally arrived in Maine, so it's a beautiful 74 degrees today with a light sea breeze, and it gets down to about 50 degrees at night. And don't we love it?
That does sound wonderful. We have been scorching here in the Midwest with some just very powerful storms popping up here and there. So it's been a wild and crazy summer. I'm glad to hear that you are not scorching up there, though.
Well, we were, but as you know, the temperature got all the way up to 80 here last week, and we were right frightened up here. Of course, we don't have air conditioner in Maine. We have New England air conditioners, which are window fans. So that's how it works for us. So tell me, Aimee, what have you been doing in the last couple of months?
Well, so the last time that we were together, Jeff, actually the last time that we, filmed our Doc Talk or invited our guests, we were actually together in Portland. So I thank you again for your hospitality on that. And it was wonderful to get to see, my fellow, board of advisor members that serve, alongside with me at the IMPE as well as the education committee. And I was super thrilled that we had our first ever guest speaker. But since then, I left Portland. I finally got a flight out and headed over to the Lake of the Ozarks that same week and hit the agribusiness conference in Missouri. So Missouri has an agribusiness conference that meets each year. So got to go and just listen to some of the challenges and the great opportunities regarding agribusiness in Missouri.
How has the river levels been in your neck of the woods with all this hot weather and everything, and what looked like to me some, not a lot of rain?
So on the Missouri River, according, to some of the movers and shakers a couple weeks ago, we were operating we were light loading just a bit. We were light loading about 8 foot 6 inches in our barges, but we're still operating as normal. We're keeping the nation fed, we're keeping the commodities moving and the supply chain strong.
Well, that's great. I think that it's always interesting that some of the very more common issues that you all face there on the inland rivers and also within the Midwest and everything, not dissimilar to what we're facing. Of course, we just saw the whole aspect of roadway trucking, yellow freight go under. They've declared bankruptcy and everything like that. And what's interesting is that there's such a shortage of drivers that 30,000 people will be put out of work with this collapse of this major trucking company, which has been around, 100 some odd years. And it seems like the predictions are that a lot of them will be absorbed into the system because there's such a shortage of drivers.
It's heartbreaking to know that, all of those families are being impacted, all of those shippers that have been faithful customers of yellow freight or yellow trucking for so long, that they may be impacted. I feel like the good news is that, our ports and our terminals, our river and our rail, we're ready to soak up some of that business and keep the nation's supply chain strong. Just like I said, we're here to serve those shippers. So if there's a way that we can connect those shippers that are going through some of this turmoil with that provider, we're here to help.
Well, that's been great to see that. And, it's, I know that you've got a very heavy travel schedule getting around to seeing folks and stuff. I've been doing a little bit of traveling, trying to stay a little close to home, but I was up in Canada, of course. And we had a great program up in Canada, and it was a international program. So it's a little different than what we present in the continental US, but we're going to be doing a similar program in the British Virgin Islands. And I understand our producer is absolutely committed to making sure she's going to be at that program when we run that off. So that should be nice. But we've seen a few interesting changes. CSX, of course, has purchased all of the assets of Pan Am Railways, which was formerly known as Guilford. And it was a Mellon organization. And what I found was interesting is that we were already seeing improvements in the system. It was Pan Am was sort of a small regional railroad, but we've seen a lot of things that have been expanding there, which has been interesting. And actually, for the first time, I think it's going to provide an interesting connection to Canada, because as you know, we're moving cargo down the coast from Canada. But now with more efficient rail connecting to the New Brunswick Southern and to Moncton and the CN system, this may create an interesting change for the way cargo is moving up here in the Northeast. And of course, in your neck of the woods, Canadian Pacific has taken over Kansas City Southern. So that's going to make some changes too.
Yeah, so our Class 1 railroads are heavily investing into their infrastructure, and we think that is going to increase the service offerings that those Class 1s can provide. They're looking at their bridge structures, they're looking at their rail as far as their ballast, and making improvements so that positive train control can move forward, so that their speeds and their safety is aligned with what our nation is demanding at this point. So I am really excited about all the infrastructure investments happening. I would love to be as encouraged, I feel like, as you are, to hear that because of CSX purchasing the Pan Am Railroad. I'm not sure what that name was. That services the Pan Am. Pan Am, is that right?
Yeah, just like the airline.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you sound very encouraged that the service is going to be better, and that there's going to be more opportunities for growth and freight and for the shipper with CSX purchasing them. And I hope that's the case. Not a whole lot of our shippers have been able to say that the Class 1s have been the best to work with and for, right? So I will take your encouragement to a new level and show some positive shining light on this.
Well, if I was from Missouri, I guess we would say, show me the what's going to happen. I'm not necessarily sure of that, but I do see a lot of new investment, a lot of new movement. Certainly the G&W has picked up a large amount of infrastructure, short line railroad infrastructure. And the Patriot Rail has expanded their operations. Watco's expanding their operations. So I think in the long run, as most of our listeners know, that our railroads and our trucking companies are our competitors, but they're also our partners, and if they're efficient, if we're efficient, in essence, it's to the benefit of all of our shippers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you mentioned the short line railroads. And so those short line railroads really seem to be the buffer, right, between the shipper and the Class 1, really trying to, meet the need of the shipper while serving, their kind of like their tenant, right, the Class 1 to which that short line leases from, making sure, the investments can continue today, tomorrow, and into the future based on the service offerings that the Class 1s give to the short line railroads, and vice versa. So I'm very proud of our short line members that are being the buffering system between the Class 1s and the shippers for the benefit of freight, for the benefit of the supply chain, right?
Well, I think the railroads have finally seen the wisdom of dealing with hub movements, where you're going from one hub to the other. And where they're building much more volume, much bigger unit trains. You're looking at container trains at 2 and 3 miles long and stuff. And they have sort of thrown off to all of the short line railroads a lot of the freight that they used to handle in small areas. So, you won't see, a CSX locomotive going into a small shipper's area, but you will see the short line serving their needs. And exactly. I think that's been and I think, we see that in the maritime world, certainly on your system. You have a lot of freight moving down the river system, which then connects in your gateways, such as the Port of South Louisiana, the Port of New Orleans. They're building their new facility in St. Bernard Parish. A lot of people confuse that because they don't realize that the Port of South Louisiana, this 54-mile stretch of port, which was the largest tonnage port in the Western Hemisphere, now the second largest behind Houston, but I think they're going to crawl back, is different than New Orleans. You know, that's a different port system down there. But they have been traditionally, they collect a lot of cargo the way our rail hubs and our trucking hubs do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just call it short line railroad of the river, right? Or short line river. um, I might adopt that, no lie. But so right after the agribusiness conference that I went to at the lake, I actually spent the week in Denver, of all places. Here's this river girl going to Denver. And it was quite interesting. It was a Southwest Fertilizer Conference, bringing in producers and brokers and suppliers and firms, transloaders from all over the world, talking about the movement of freight, the movement of fertilizer into our country so that we can then, what do they call it? Feed the farms that then, create the harvest that we then transport the goods for US consumption, but as well as international consumption. It was very interesting, getting to learn about some of their successes and their challenges, getting to meet those producers and hearing about all of the wonderful expansion plans. I think that is probably, what fuels my fire these days is hearing about all of the expansion opportunities and plans and how do we get there. And I know that firms in our membership and yours alike, with HDR and VAA and so many more, are offering those opportunities and those services to firms who are looking at expansion. A lot of us have that big vision in our head. Okay, we want to take our maybe our 200-acre facility that serves this, and this, and we want to make it this big conglomerate that now can offer this, and this, and this. But how do we get there? We need those trusted firms and those trusted providers that know the regional opportunities to leverage then against the federal opportunities. It's just so exciting for me.
Have you seen a perceived shift in since with all of the interruptions with fertilizer movement out of Russia and the grain movement out of Ukraine? Have you seen an increase in the Midwest there and along the river system that is indicative of really people thinking differently about supplying the world's needs for food and for increased agricultural production?
Believe it or not, I haven't, and I really thought I would. I really thought that we were going to see a huge monkey wrench in the system when Russia and Ukraine started their kind of battle, right? Because of the ingress and the egress, the access to the ports for export, etc. And I think our administration saw that as well, or anticipated it anyway, because the USDA actually came up with a program that is helping boost our US production of fertilizer. So they're saying we don't want to be reliant upon foreign countries for our sole source. What can we do to increase our own reliance on our own American products?
Yeah, and I think in the long run, it's not the production side of it as much as it's going to be the transportation side of it that's going to maybe hinder the availability of these commodities and the agri products to the final marketplace because as we continue to see just these little minor disruptions, everybody has been very comfortable thinking that, well, gee, we don't hear much about the supply chain anymore. It's more about what's happening in Hollywood. And I think in the long run here that, it's because of the decreased volumes, decreased spending. These things have had a big impact on, the amount of commodity demand. And that has eased the pressure on the transportation system. It hasn't fixed it, though. Hasn't fixed it.
Agreed. One of the things that I find, kind of really fascinating about that whole thing, with the fertilizer coming in, here we are in this whole kind of infrastructure era where the administration has invested and injected tons of funds, get it, into our system for infrastructure investment. But what goes into that? It's concrete, cement, clinker and aggregates, right? We are a net importer in the United States of those commodities. About 60% of those commodities are imported into the United States each year. So making sure that our producers overseas, our suppliers of these different commodities, whether it be fertilizer or concrete and clinker, etc., they have access to the ocean-going vessels that they need in order to import it into the United States. For a long time, the access to the vessel itself seemed to be projected as a scare, right? They were fearful that because of the 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 ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. When all of that happened, you saw different, and during COVID, mind you, you saw a lot of big box shippers starting to kind of gobble up our bulk tankers, right, and start converting those over into kind of container handling ships. But in doing so, when they did that, they took away the capacity for those bulk loaders to come into the United States. So it was a big fear that the aggregates and the dry bulk world would not have access to the ships that they need to bring over to the United States.
We got to keep in mind too that bulk ships are generally, the lowest charter rate of all of the vessels out there right now. And as the bulk fleets have disappeared, or they've been gobbled up for other activities or been put on long-term charter and stuff like that, that's brought the rates back up a little bit. But there are a number. It's still the largest number of vessels that are out there right now are the bulk vessels. It's the bulk oil vessels that are creating, sort of the constraint because, they're getting fewer and far between because there's so many of them in transit right now. And of course, there are a lot of them are using for the, put the oil in them and then use them for storage and transit as they're moving and stuff. So it's managed to have an impact. And of course, we see that in the way the rates are changing and the production is changing and stuff. But I also found that there seems to be a lot of innovation in different areas. Like right now, the big feeding frenzy is the wind production, offshore wind production. And you and I had a conversation, if I remember correctly, over a cocktail related to, oh, come on, you can admit it. And we were talking about what a great idea would be to build, components of offshore wind on different parts of the river system, and then bring them down, and then find places in the in the Gulf of Mexico, that now that those fields are opening up. And it's interesting about it is I happen to be talking to a good friend who's the port director in Albany, and he was telling me, he says that's exactly what they're doing on the Hudson River. They're making component parts in different places, taking it down to Brooklyn Terminal, right, where they're going to be assembling everything. So they're actually doing, what we were talking about in regards to, component here, component here, component here, component here. So I think Rick Hendricks up there recognizes the value of the river system. Hard to believe, most people in Albany probably they recognize they're a river port. But the fact of the matter is that they're building these components, and I think that's going to open up. Because the bigger issue that a lot of people haven't really kind of groped with is the fact that we're going to put all this offshore wind production and all this huge kilowatt capacity, and no place really to plug it in that isn't going to be able to absorb the capacity.
I was afraid you were going to bring that up. I think that's what our conversation was when over a couple of drinks. But a lot of things have changed since you and I first talked about that, right? So, at that time, the administration, the Biden administration was really kind of sinking a lot of investment funds into this new green energy type of infrastructure, this offshore wind farming. At the time when you and I were talking about this, it was kind of only happening kind of in the Northeast, and now they've opened up the opportunities to do this in the Gulf Coast. Also at the time, there was not an outlet to recycle, reuse, discard of the old components. So you have all these wind blades and farms and components that go into it, but there was no way to discard of, old pieces. Well, now there is. So I'm pretty excited about that because, that to me was like, what are we going to do, right? But using the river system, and what you and I were talking about was using the river system to get some of these massive, large components. I don't know if you've ever stood underneath one of these, massive wind things. My daughter wanted me to stop one day going along the interstate so that she could go and stand underneath it. And but anywho's, they're massive, right? And so, have you ever seen one of these like on a flatbed truck driving across the interstate system, and what an impact that makes to your general public and communities trying to transit back and forth to work, to the grocery store, and to school? So having the ability to ship those on the river system can be totally beneficial for our country, for our citizens, etc.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I think part of the reason being is that, first of all, when the wind farm plans first came out, and I've done a couple of these BOEM applications and Coast Guard analysis
Oh gosh.
applications with various firms. And in the midst of all of that, the units are smaller, they produce less power and stuff. But one of the things that became very apparent was that, the number of these units had to be reduced. And so what's happened is they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, at our AMPE conference in October up here in Portland, Maine, two of the topics are going to be preparing your port for offshore wind, and the aspects of policies that lead to offshore wind development from a state perspective. And I think that what's been interesting is that we're seeing fewer towers, but much higher capacity. And at that stage now, how do you transport this stuff? Right? How do you move these components? We brought a lot of this stuff in from Europe and other locations, and now we're producing it domestically, and it could be very easily produced up on the river system, in any of the 38 states that your river system hits. And we're seeing that already, in places like Albany, where component pieces are being assembled down in Brooklyn, and coming down the river.
Absolutely. And so there are actually several programs right now in the federal funding stream and realm, federal funding world, that are helping manufacturers, locate into some of these almost kind of distressed communities. They're offering tax credits for domestic manufacturing and others through EDA and EAA, the Economic Adjustment Assistance. And through the Economic Development Administration, and so many more different programs. So it's quite interesting to see.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages that you have on the Inland River system is the fact that you have more space available for development than we do on the coastal side. You start looking at, except maybe in the southeast, but you start getting into northeast, every square inch of space is occupied by something. And we're seeing the development now, much more of inland ports and stuff like that. Chattanooga has an inland port, the Great Appalachian Port, which is actually in Georgia, but as part of the elements of what they do. And I think the recognition is that improving the transportation system to give shippers many more alternatives and options. And one of the disadvantages of part of your system on the inland rivers has been the fact that the sources of materials are not always near the river system. Right now, this gives a great opportunity to create that manufacturing, because everything is coming together in parcels and pieces and everything. And I think the reality is that all of our ports, coastal and inland ports, can all take advantage of this on how this is managed and how this is handled. And quite frankly, I think, one of the issues that like Crowley and some of the other Orsted and some of the other companies are running into is the fact that they're looking for prime ports, in the Northeast fundamentally right now, because that's where the first farms are going in place. And there's not a lot of space. Obviously Connecticut is developing theirs, but that was a lucky find.
Yeah.
And of course Salem, they're hoping to catch up with that in Brooklyn. But you've got a lot more space in the Gulf of Mexico,
I
which
do. So feel free to start giving my phone number out, because I have about 430 members around the nation that would just absolutely welcome this cargo for sure.
your public phone number or the private phone number you gave me.
So Jeff, don't forget, you know, the next time that we're together, it's going to be filming our live podcast at IRPT's annual conference in Louisville, Kentucky. We're going to do it over lunch hour in front of the big audience, and I'm going to be so excited to offer this to our listeners and to our viewers at home.
I think that'll be great. And, I think one of the things that for those of you who are, listen to this faithfully, and I know a number of you have out there said how you enjoy it, I think it would be helpful that what are the topics that our listeners are interested in as well. We enjoy the conversation. We enjoy sort of unpeeling the onion to see really what's out there, and I think in many cases it's been useful to see where the information has come from, because we're always tracking. I certainly track everything that goes on in the international market, and I depend on you to track what's going on in the inland market. But a lot of that information will be available at your convention. It's always a very well attended and everything convention, as I hope it will be at our AMPE meeting, our conference in Portland, Maine. Great time to be in Portland. Leaves are changing. It's a gorgeous area. But, the one thing I think that's been very good is that most recently people are getting a lot busier. There's a lot more activity. All of our port activities, all of our transportation system is picking up, and people don't have a lot of time really to spend time going through all of the data and looking at all the sheets. And that's something that you do and I do in our respective organizations, is to try to find the pertinent data that's out there and share it with our members. Right. We have about 4,000 people on our general list, and we are just getting up to the point where we've had about just shy of 3,500 people who have had the honor and privilege of listening to me speak at them. From undergraduate to postgraduate, military, and everything like that. So it's been great from that standpoint. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary at IAMPE in February, I believe it is. So, but the fact of the matter is that, we work hard for our members, as you do for your members, to keep them in the loop on what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Jeff, for your time today, for your expertise, your friendship, all of the above.
Absolutely, and I'll look forward to seeing you at the IRPT conference, where we can have another cocktail and determine to solve all the world's problems as necessary out there. So hopefully everybody's enjoyed us, and we thank you all for listening in the program. And we'll continue to try to keep these interesting, because we know your time is precious. But hopefully you'll join us, and if you have any comments, we'll look forward to hearing from them. Miss Aimee, again, thank you as well.
Thank you.